At the outset, I would like to express my deep appreciation to my colleagues, Professor Namika Jha and Ashwin, for putting together this event since we originally planned. I'm so delighted to see all of you students who are present for this very special lecture that we are inaugurating today. Let me at the outset extend a warm welcome to whom I would call a very dear friend of OP Jindal Global University, Dr. Bibek Debroy. Dr. Debroy has come to our campus on many occasions, has had a very deep and long and very special relationship. Has been a great source of inspiration for me for many years, even before we embarked on the journey of building this university. But not only remained as a passive supporter, but also an active person who has constantly given suggestions of various aspects of institutional building. So thank you so much, Dr. Debroy, for accepting our invitation to deliver the inaugural Khaitan and Company lecture. I also want to thank Mr. Prasenjit Chakravarti, partner corporate at Khaitan and Co., for taking time out of his non-billable hours to be with us here at Jindal Global Law School and OP Jindal Global University. Before I formally move into the event, I want to say that this is a very special occasion because Khaitan and Company is the first law firm that has established an endowment at Jindal Global Law School. So I would like to pay rich tribute to Khaitan and Company for this. And I do want to mention that this relationship that the Khaitan and Company has established with our university and our law school has numerous implications for the way the legal profession potentially can shape. This has been the culture and trends across US law firms. It is not uncommon for major US law firms to institute endowments in law schools in the United States. But unfortunately, the larger part of Indian evolution when it comes to philanthropy and institutional presence of both professionals as well as law firms, individuals in the form of philanthropy in India is very, very less. And this is a very rare phenomenon. We were very fortunate that we had ended up having two such endowments in our early phase of our evolution. One was from Dr. Abhishek Manu Singhvi, and of course the second one, which is an institutional one, is from Khaitan and Company. I want to take this moment to thank Mr. Haigreev Khaitan, the managing partner of Khaitan and Company, for not only envisioning the endowment itself, but also extending the full support of his firm and his lawyers and his colleagues to advance the vision of this endowment. There are several aspects of the endowment, some of which my colleague Professor Srijit will outline for us. But all I want to say is that it sets a very important commitment on the part of the firm for all the young students who are present here. It also recognizes the need for committing towards public service. Our university's motto is that a private university in promoting public service. And the idea of public service need to be embedded into all forms and manifestations. The Indian corporate laws amendment that led to the CSR legislation is one such example, but there are many other ways by which you can demonstrate that commitment towards public service. The pro bono practice that many law firms adopt as a part of their own functioning, that's another example of recognizing the role of lawyers in advancing public interests as well as social impact. I also want to mention that this is after Khaitan and Company has established this. We are, of course, in discussions with other law firms. So in many ways, Khaitan and Company has become a pioneer in establishing this endowment. I am very confident that this endowment will go from strength to strength, and we will have many more events, initiatives, conferences, lectures, workshops, as well as other things under the umbrella of this endowment. I also want to say that the topic of today's lecture so fits beautifully with the vision of the endowment, also because of the fact that reforming the legal system is so inextricably connected to issues surrounding economy, society, polity, and so many other things that we do within the university. We are a multidisciplinary university with 12 different schools in law, business, international affairs, public policy, liberal arts and humanities, journalism and communication, art and architecture, banking and finance, environment and sustainability, psychology and counseling, languages and literature, and public health and human development. I very strongly believe that the idea of law and the vision of building a rule of law society where issues relating to access to justice are at the heart and center of the future governance of India is also going to be reflected in our ability to reform the legal system. And I think it is particularly telling that somebody like Dr. Bibek Debroy is going to be speaking about it, because he comes from this vision of reforming the legal system from many other disciplines, including from economics and philosophy and political science and other areas. So we are all very eager to listen to him, and I want to once again extend my heartiest appreciation for his visit. As you can imagine, being the chairman of the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council has numerous responsibilities, and instead of giving this talk in some online platform and Zoom, he has chosen to come from Delhi to be with us and to spend that precious time with us. So I am truly grateful to him. Thank you, Mr. Prasenjit Chakravarti, for being here. We look forward to hearing your reflections on Khaitan's legacy, but also some of the interesting aspects of the firm that you are currently involved. With those words, I would like to once again extend a warm welcome to all of you, including our faculty members, deans, students who are present here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Rajkumar. Now I'd like to request Professor Dr. S.G. Srijit, Executive Dean, Jindal Global Law School, for the introductory remarks.
Good morning to everybody, distinguished members on the dais, my dear students, faculty members. Well, when I'm asked to be the introductory speaker, that means that I have free to introduce whatsoever I like. So I thought that it would be appropriate if I try to introduce our distinguished speaker for the day, Professor Bibek Debroy. I've met him for the first time today. But he's known to me as the author of 3 books. Well, of course, of the many books he has written, I happen to read 3 books. And I consider myself to be heavily influenced and informed by the 3 books. You're going to listen to him very soon on the topic, reforming the legal system in India. I thought that he's going to come before you as a voice. So let me try to present what kind of a voice he is. Of course, this is my modest understanding of a man. I know that he cannot be captured in his totality because it's too profound for me to capture that. I'm not presenting these books, 3 books, in any chronological order. This is not the sequential order in which I read this book. But I'll still proceed in the way in which these books cast an influence upon me. The first one is a book on the history of the fountain pens, which he has very appropriately titled Inked in India. This book tells the story of the becoming and also the unbecoming of a product of highest social utility. A product that helps us participate in social production, that helps us socialize in our routine social life. Moreover, it is a product with amazing constitutive potential and constructive possibilities, the fountain pen. But then comes the question, is this really a tale of the fountain pens or not? Perhaps it's the tale of the fountain pens. Perhaps it's the tale of the pen users. Or perhaps it's the tale of many lives associated with the pens. Nib manufacturers, pen users, readers, and many others. There is a grand parade of the people associated with pens, especially fountain pens. A grand parade proceeds before our eyes as you read through the book. The book juxtaposes Gandhi and Ambedkar on a chapter. The book speaks about the Gandhi's fascination for the reed pens, that also reflects that the Gandhi had an obsession with the indigeneity. He always believed in self-sufficiency through the Indian villages. Whereas Ambedkar, on the other side, was a big fan of Parker fountain pens, who believed in the modernity. As you read through these pages, the juxtaposition of Gandhi and Ambedkar, you could see the Gandhian aspirations with indigeneity and the Ambedkarian ambition for modernity getting juxtaposed in the book through the imageries of fountain pens in our minds. The book has many trivia. Well, I do not know whether trivias are trivial or not. I believe that trivias all the time keep on arising the curiosity of the reader. And this book is rich in that. In sum, when I read the book, I got the impression that pen captures an indigeneity which is in us. It also speaks about the potential energy in human beings, because pens, fountain pens, were an outstanding means of human socialization, something which has a diminishing utility in our times. The second book I got to read him, the second book of him which I got to read is a book called Bhagavad Gita for Millennials. Now, we live in a time whereby we have to make so many rational choices because we have abundance before us and you have to make choices. Now, only through these right choices that we can participate in successful socialization. But how do we make these good choices, or how do we make these rational choices? When there are numerous choices before you, all of us are in the Arjuna dilemma. We do not know how to move forward. At that point, we need something to, our reason to be informed. We need to make rational choices. And as per this book, we will be informed by the Krishna consciousness. We will be informed by the Gospels of the Krishna. But then, what does this book in fact tell us? Or when you, the millennials, when you get it after you're reading the book, it will tell us our own situationality in a world which is after the madness of production, which is after the madness of mobility. It will tell us how to fulfill our desires and be better off by making the right choices through the Krishna consciousness. It also tells us how to obtain optimal outcomes by making right choices. In sum, this is actually the Gita for the millennials. This is actually the Gita for the Homo socio-economicus. There is an economist's undertone all through the book. There is an economic leitmotif all through this book, even though the book is on Bhagavad Gita for the millennials. And the third book, which is entitled When Devi Comes Home, Navaratri, When Devi Comes Home. Well, here, Devi in this book is actually the dynamic, kinetic energy. The energy, the Shakti, which actually keeps the universe pulsating. 9 nights of worship. 9 nights of worship all over India. But in each region, there is a variation in the worship. Now, this reminds me of a style generally adopted by Milan Kundera, which he mainly manifested through his book, the Book of Laughter and Forgetting. There are variations throughout. But you make a dive into variation, and each variation takes you deep down to the core. So as you read through the chapters of this book in a very Kundera-esque fashion, you find that each variation goes deep down to the existential core in which the Shakti energy resides. Be that in Kerala, or in Kashmir, or in Assam, or in Bengal, you find each variation taking you deep down to the core of that existential reality you call as the goddess. The book also tells the story of pluralities in India. It also tells us the diversities in India through the different rituals we practice. It localizes each ritual and thereby informs us that we live in a wonderful world of pluralities all the time in constant pursuit of certain truths. This book is also a stark reminder about the role of the women in the society, because Goddess is the woman. Goddess represents the feminine energy in the universe. Devi is the one which keeps the universe moving. It is the Devi energy, the goddess energy, the Shakti energy, which actually makes outstanding transformations at the quantum level for the wave and the particle to collapse. As Shankaracharya starts the Saundarya Lahari, "O mighty Shiva, you cannot even pulsate without the Shakti energy in the world." The book ends on this social note, ends us with an optimism, ends us with a call that we live in a nation which is diverse, and in this nation, there is an ubiquitous presence of the feminine energy. We need to respect that. So if I look at Mr. Debroy, I would not dare to textualize him, but if at all, I have to conclude it by saying that what do we make of the man who actually wrote these 3 books? I would say that he also socializes pretty much like all of us. But his way of socializing is that he dwells in this material world by looking deeper and deeper into his own metaphysical existence, all the time exploring one's inner possibilities, the constitutive, constructive energies within the human being. He's all the time trying to translate, to participate in the social production around us. It would be inappropriate for me to say anything else about the endowment or about Jindal Global Law School or our own ambition at this point. I should end on this blissful note, on this sanguine note, because I've introduced a man which I consider as a great honor which was bestowed upon me before you, as a voice which I understand. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Srijit. I'd like to request the guest of honor, Mr. Prasenjit Chakravarti, partner Khaitan & Co., to address the gathering on the theme Celebrating Khaitan & Company's Legacy in the Pursuit of Excellence for Over 100 Years.
Hi, am I audible? Good. Firstly, Professor Dr. Rajkumar, the founding Vice Chancellor of the OP Jindal Global University, Dr. Bibek Debroy, the esteemed next speaker and guest speaker here, the faculty members, the professors, and above all, the wonderful students who I'm addressing here. It's a privilege to be here before you today and speaking to all of you. It's a particular privilege because as Khaitan, we are deeply kind of entrenched in the philosophy of development and growth related aspects of law and law students and the society in general. So while as a law firm, I will briefly talk about Khaitan, but I think perhaps Khaitan, if I may, at a cost of sounding immodest, doesn't need an introduction as a law firm, but it's a full service law firm established in 1911. So yes, a very old firm in number of years, not in ideas. And insofar as the founding member, Mr. Debi Prasad Khaitan, he was one of the draftsmen of the drafting committee of the Constitution. So that's the rich legacy we have. It's of course passed on from generations, and it's being spearheaded by our wonderful managing partner, Mr. Haigreve Khaitan, who Dr. Rajkumar referred to. So that's the legacy. We, of course, are full-service law firms. I am a corporate M&A lawyer. I practice in that particular field, but we have dispute resolution, white-collar crime, and all conceivable practice area which are relevant in the world today from Khaitan. It's a 1,200-plus lawyers law firm across all the prominent cities and the offshore city of Singapore. So that's in brief about Khaitan, but what really the topic given to me is what's Khaitan's legacy in pursuit of excellence over the 100 years. So I think besides what we do, which is any law firm does to work for profitability and practice areas, we place a lot of emphasis on things like training. If you see our endeavors in continuous legal programs through our webinars, seminars, and other stuff which we churn out, I think that's one small reflection of that. And in pursuant to that kind of endeavor, when this endowment opportunity kind of emanated, I think we were very delighted to forge this alliance with OP Jindal Group and University, because it allows us to kind of exactly conduct some of these sessions which you will be exposed to as we move along, which will help you not only kind of develop your core skills as a lawyer, but also equip you well in order to carry out the legal reforms, which my next speaker will talk about. Because I think it's one thing to know about legal reforms, but how do you do it and who will carry it out? So I think it's the people like you, the beacon of hope, the next generation, who will be or who should be doing it. Now, how do you do it? So I think some of the skill sets which you must have as a corporate lawyer. I can only talk about corporate lawyer as a partner about 17 odd years in Khaitan and overall 20 years, what it takes to succeed. Some of those skill sets which also will be equally applicable and relevant when you have to carry out legal reforms. So what are those skills in a nutshell, and how will this endowment help you is what I will briefly touch upon. There's a good overlap there. So first is research skills. If you don't have sound research skills, I'm afraid even at my level, when I have to do negotiations and deals, research often holds the key. I cannot be talking about obsolete laws or outdated provisions and go to another law firm and negotiate. I must be updated with the relevant provisions. So research always arms you with that. And I think this endowment will also focus on a lot of high quality research, state-of-the-art research, equip you with that. So that is one part, the research bit. The second very critical part to succeed, I think, in whether you look to carry out a reform or excel in a law firm is your the softer skills like negotiations. Now, negotiation is not often taught in textbooks. This is something which day-to-day life you must imbibe, acquire. We will carry out some negotiation courses for you, pass on our real-life deal experiences, what you should say, and more importantly, what you should not say to people across the table. That's very important. So I think it's very important that you must have the capacity to listen, understand, and not just speak when it comes to negotiation. That's very important, which will be again taught to you, shared with you as part of the endowment program which we will run with this university. The third aspect, which is again very important in order to, I would say, succeed both as a lawyer and again as somebody who is equipped to kind of make changes in the legal system, is thought leadership, and also the ability to kind of assess what the society needs. I will give you a few examples. Our law firm has been deeply associated with the insolvency code. When in 2016 it was being sought to be launched, we were entrenched deeply with that. And of course, till then the lenders were at all, in dire straits because they were not getting their proper recoveries of their dues. The insolvency code, we were deeply entrenched. The data privacy bill, you would have seen many of you on LinkedIn. Many of our partners are very active, working closely with the government bodies also to give ideas and thoughts from practical experience how to best go about this law, which has been now passed in Rajya Sabha. I think it should see light of the day very soon. Company law, CSR, what Professor Raj touched upon, but CSR is a law which is part of ESG. I've spoken about ESG at length in many forums. ESG is an evolving law. Again, you need to be aware of what's going on not only in India, but in other countries. So again, we will also run some courses around comparative business analysis. So you should know what other jurisdictions are doing, how much can you imbibe from them, and put them into practice. So all of this will, I think, help you remarkably in kind of your growth as a lawyer, set you very nicely, because I'm sure many of you do vie to work in a law firm, and many of you reached out separately also. And a question often asked is, how do you succeed? So I think these are the some of the traits you must possess, besides the, of course, theoretical knowledge which you must have, that's a given. But some of the softer skills, the negotiation skills, the art of listening, the interacting, or have an open mind, that's so important. And I sincerely hope this endowment will actually present all these opportunities through me, and many other of my partners will come and kind of conduct workshops, sessions, etc., which will hopefully enlighten you and set you up very nicely to excel in law college, a life outside that, and also if you do pursue policy and public speaking and all, I think to carry out legal reforms, which is also an incredible field. So I think with those words, I would say I wish you all the very best in this wonderful college. It's a magnificent institution which has been set up in a very short span, actually quite amazing. And my compliments to the Chancellor, and I wish you all the best. I'm here, so in the Q&A we can exchange more thoughts if you have any questions. But I think with those words, I wish you all the best. Thanks for listening to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chakravarti. I'd like to request the Chief Guest, Dr. Bibek Debroy, Chairman, Economic Advisory Council to the Prime Minister of India, to address the gathering on the theme, Reforming the Legal System.
Professor Rajkumar, Vice Chancellor of OP Jindal, Mr. Prasenjit Chakravarti, Professor Srijit, Professor Patnaik, Suprita Acharya, faculty members, students, let me first thank Professor Rajkumar and OP Jindal for having invited me to deliver this talk on reforming India's legal system. Just give me a minute, I've forgotten what I wanted to speak about. That's of course absolute rubbish. Thank you, Srijit, for that very, very kind introduction. I just wanted to show you that I don't only write about fountain pens, I also use fountain pens. This is a fountain pen made by a Japanese company. Unless you actually use fountain pens, you will not have heard of it. This company's name is Platinum. And if I look at the cap, it says Platinum Model 3776. Any guesses about why this model is called 3776? It's meant to be a rhetorical question. I'm not asking you to answer that question. The clue is it's Japanese. And 3776 is the height of Mount Kilimanjaro. In the introduction, Srijit mentioned the Bhagavad Gita. There is one particular shloka of Bhagavad Gita that's important for all of you as students. And that is the 34th shloka in the 4th chapter. The relevant part of it, you can read up the entire bit, the relevant part of it says, Tat Viddhi Pranipatena Pariprashnena Sevaya. The relevant part being Pariprashnena. I think the most important aspect of being a student is to ask questions about why. And what I hope to do when I speak about reforming the legal system is to trigger this asking of questions on your part as students. Being a student does not mean that you accept what Professor Srijit says, you accept what Rajkumar says, you accept what Bibek Debroy says, or you even accept what Prasenjit says, but question everything. The legal system. What is the legal system? I presume most of you are students of law, perhaps not all, but most of you are probably students of law. So if I ask you what is the legal system, you will give me definitions about rule of law. You will speak about dicey and give me definitions about rule of law. And he will say that an efficient legal system means that there is rule of law. There is equality before the law. The law that is passed by legislature is more important than any divine right. And so far as judicial procedures are concerned, they are impartial and transparent. That is what we would say is efficient rule of law. And reforming the legal system is meant to ensure that we get there. That's not a new question. It's a question that every society has been concerned with down the years. I think in passing it was mentioned that I translate stuff. All of you have heard of the Ramayana, in particular the Valmiki Ramayana. In case you do not know, there are other Sanskrit versions of the Ramayana also, but the first one, the earliest one, was the Valmiki Ramayana. All of us have some vague understanding or knowledge about the Ramayana story. Rama has been vanished to the forest, he's been exiled. Bharata goes to bring him back, persuade him to return to Ayodhya. And Rama begins to ask him a series of questions. If you look at those series of questions, that series of questions, they're exactly the questions that you would ask for rule of law to exist. Those are exactly the questions you would ask if you wanted to find out if governance was being properly ensured. In the Mahabharata, again everyone knows the essence of the Mahabharata story. After the royal sacrifice, the Rajasuya sacrifice yajna has been held, Rishi Narada comes to visit the Pandavas and asks Yudhishthira a set of questions. Those questions that he asked Yudhishthira are also identical questions about governance, about rule of law. In the Mahabharata, you probably know that there is a very, very large section called Shanti Parva, the book of peace, where Bhishma is lying down on his bed of arrows and is instructing Yudhishthira and his brothers. You'll find aspects about the law there too. For instance, in the Shanti Parva section of the Mahabharata, in talking about crimes and criminal law, Bhishma tells Yudhishthira that if it is a rich person who is guilty of a crime, you should never imprison that person. If a rich person is guilty of a crime, that person should never be imprisoned, because that imprisonment is at the cost of the public exchequer. Instead, a monetary penalty should be imposed. It's only a poor person who cannot afford to pay who should be imprisoned. You may or may not agree with that argument, it's a value judgment, but you will have to admit that it has an impeccable logic of its own. Also interestingly, insofar as civil cases are concerned, Bhishma lists out the 19 most important kinds of civil cases that should be tried out in order of priority. And what was right at the top in that day and age? Breach of contract. Unfortunately, and I'm deliberately using the word unfortunately, despite passing out of a place like O.P. Jindal, I'm reasonably certain that you will have no knowledge about this tradition we had on rule of law and jurisprudence, which to my mind is very tragic. Instead, when I ask you about rule of law, you will quote for me the World Bank's World Governance Indicators. As some of you are aware, the World Bank has a set of indicators where it tries to measure governance cross-country. Governance, of course, is a buzzword. It is difficult to pin down. It is difficult to measure. It is difficult to quantify, particularly if you're going to make cross-country judgments. Nonetheless, the World Bank has this set of governance indicators, in one of which we have rule of law. That definition of rule of law goes much beyond dicey. It talks about political stability, it talks about control of corruption, and similarly, we also have something called the World Justice Project. I said cross-country comparisons are very difficult. But if you look at these cross-country comparisons for what they are worth, what do we find? We find that India does not perform that well. So obviously the legal system needs a change. The legal system needs to change, not because the World Bank or the World Justice Project has said it needs to change. The legal system needs to change because, as Professor Rajkumar says, a change in the legal system, efficient dispute resolution, is essential because the legal system is the foundation for everything else that happens. So if India, which is now in the trajectory of Amrit Kal, which sets out the template till 2047, is going to get a 7.5% or X% rate of growth, and efficient functioning of the legal system is essential. Having said this, what is the legal system? And what are the various dimensions to reform the legal system? So let's quickly list them out. The first one is, of course, statutes. And when one is talking about statutes, because of what the Constitution says in Article 246, the statutes can be at the level of the Union government. They can also be at the level of the state governments. And I will talk a little bit about statutory reform. As students of the legal system, you will invariably use the expression law and order. I have no training in the law, and therefore I have never understood what law and order exactly means. I can understand law, but what is order? To the extent that I can make sense of law and order, the moment I use the word order, I have to do something about not only criminal justice reform, I will also have to do something about police reform. Because the word order to me connotes police reform or its lack. And the moot question, therefore, is that what exactly has happened or not happened on police reform despite the Prakash Singh judgment in 1996. The third aspect of the legal system is, of course, what is called administrative law, which is not statutory law, but all the various orders, regulations, circulars, and so on and so forth that are sanctified and blessed by the statutory law, but are different in nature from statutory law. This becomes especially important because there is a quote that floats around, a quote that is from Tacitus, from Annals, which says something like this, or that's the way you will find it floating around on the net: the more corrupt a state, the more numerous the laws. Laws not just in the statutory sense, but also the administrative sense. If you actually read Tacitus, or a proper translation of Tacitus, you will find that he implied no correlation between, he implied no causation between the two. The more corrupt a state, the more numerous the laws. Well, correlation, but not necessarily causation. The trouble with these plethora of laws, statutory as well as administrative, is that India, as has often been said, is over-legislated and under-governed. Now, what do I mean by that? Thousands of years ago, the counterpart of the government today was the king. If I ask you a word for the word king in any of the Indian languages, you will probably end up saying, there are many words, you will probably end up saying Raja or Rajan. But there are many other words for king. Rajan is not an ordinary king. Rajan is a king who delights the subjects. How does he delight the subjects? He delights the subjects by protecting the virtuous and punishing the wicked. And our texts tell us that the first Rajan, in the sense of delighting the subjects, was a king named Prithu, who did all kinds of things. He promulgated rules for exploiting the environment, he built cities, he had rules for agriculture, and of course he protected the virtuous and punished the wicked, as a result of which the earth became his daughter and came to be known as Prithvi or Prithvi, because she was Prithu's daughter. Those of you who have some exposure to statistics will know that all statisticians talk about type 1 errors and type 2 errors. A type 1 error, and don't get worried if you don't know statistics, a type 1 error essentially occurs when you reject what is called a null hypothesis when it happens to be true. And a type 2 error essentially accepts a null hypothesis that is false. In the legal context, what do these type 1 errors and type 2 errors mean? Essentially, they mean that I should not punish the guilty. I should punish the guilty, and I should not punish the innocent. The question to ask, reforming the legal system: do you think in India the guilty are punished? And do you think the innocent are not punished? A former Chief Justice of India was Justice Venkatachalaya. And I am reminded of him because a collection of essays is just being brought out in his honor, and he, by the way, is about 93 now. And I've just written the introduction yesterday to this book. Many, many years ago, Justice Venkatachalaya once had told me, somewhat in jest, that in India, everyone who should be in jail is outside jail, and everyone who is in jail should not be in jail. So obviously, if the rule of if the principle of the legal system is that the guilty should be punished and the innocent should not be punished, we are not delivering. We are unable to reduce both kinds of errors. I do not know if in the newspapers you noticed the case of a person named Vishnu Tiwari. Vishnu Tiwari was falsely accused of a rape case, and he has just been released a few months ago after being imprisoned for a period of more than 20 years. In passing, we are therefore also talking about the under trials. If you are not a student of the law, the popular perception of the law and the legal system will come about through films, sometimes Bollywood films, and now, of course, OTT. And I'm sure several of you will remember Saurabh Shukla as a judge in Jolly LLB. And what does Saurabh Shukla say in Jolly LLB? He says any judge knows what is true and what is false. Any judge knows who is guilty and who is not guilty. The trouble is, the judge has to go by evidence. As you will have gathered, I know a little bit about Sanskrit. there is no word for lawyer in Sanskrit unless I artificially construct one. Oh, you'll say vakil, but vakil is not a Sanskrit word. There is no word for adjournment in Sanskrit. Those texts that I alluded to describe a jury process both on the criminal side and on the civil side. But there were no lawyers. There were no adjournments. And as a moot question, would it be better to revert to a system of jury trials as we used to have before the Nanavati case? Now you'll say, look at this guy. Doesn't know a damn thing about the law and is advocating jury trials. I am not the one who said it. I'm quoting Mark Galanter. So now you cannot criticize someone as not knowing the law. If you look up those texts, you will find that the most serious crime thousands of years ago was perjury. Trawl the Indian legal system and tell me since 1947 or since 1950, how many instances will you be able to find of someone being punished for perjury? In all these years, we will probably find about 1.5 cases of perjury, someone being punished for perjury. Protecting the virtuous, punishing the wicked. That means I need an efficient dispute resolution mechanism. What do I have? I have 6 million cases pending in high courts. What do I have? I have 44.4 million cases pending in lower courts. I have 70,000 cases pending before Supreme Court. I have an aggregate of something like 47 million cases pending before various courts. And this is only courts. If I include quasi-judicial forums, I probably have about 50 million cases. So I have 50 million cases. How many households are there in India? 300 million households. $50 million cases, 300 million households. Let's say a typical case has two sides, two parties. Not necessarily true on the criminal side, but then I'm just using a back of the envelope number to drive home a point. Because in the same case, you may have multiple parties. So roughly speaking, 17% of households in India are litigating. Despite all the dissatisfaction with the legal system, roughly speaking, about 17% of households in India are litigating. Which means many households still think that despite the warts and blemishes of the legal system will deliver. Out of the 50 million cases that constitute the backlog, roughly speaking, 2/3 are criminal cases, 1/3 civil cases. With the ratio slightly different depending on whether I am talking about a lower court or whether I am talking about a high court. Have you heard of the Behrampur Bank? Probably haven't, unless you are interested inordinately in Bengal. In 2023, this year, the Behrampur Bank case was finally disposed of. How long did it take? 72 years. The case was started first in 1951, and it has taken 72 years. I already said, indirectly, that we are talking about the trajectory for 2047, the template for 2047, so therefore we are talking about reforms. Each person, each economist will have his or her own definition of reforms, but whichever way I define reforms, they will involve a dependence on the market. A market is not a mandi. A market is an abstract, theoretical, conceptual structure that economists use. But every market functions in an institutional setting. And that institutional setting, infrastructure if you like, is provided for by the legal system. When we get into the specifics of reforming the legal system, what are we talking about? Several different ingredients, so let me quickly mention them. The first element that we are talking about is reforming statutes. You will know from reading the newspapers or whatever else, trawling the media, that the Union government has repealed recently about 1600 old statutes. But these are statutes at the level of the Union government. The statutes at the level of the state governments are yet to be repealed, and the oldest statute on the statute books is something that is called the Bengal Indigo Contracts Act, which goes back to 1836. Now make no mistake, repealing a statute is necessary but is easy. But the bulk of statutory reform is not repealing. Because rare is it the case that you will be able to repeal a statute in its entirety. More often than not, you will have to repeal specific sections. And you will have to rationalize and harmonize. As you probably know, again, if you've been following the newspapers, recently more than around 55 odd labor laws were unified under 4 labor codes. But you also probably know that labor is in the concurrent list of the Constitution, and therefore the orders that should follow this unification and harmonization has still not been issued by all the states. A moot question is, should statutes in India be open-ended? Or should statutes be enacted for a fixed period of time, after which the statute will automatically be repealed unless a fresh exercise determines that the statute should continue? Time is not yet over, Raj, so what kind of signal is that? To some extent, there is an ideological issue also involved. Because when one is talking about repealing statutes or reforming statutes, one is also talking about or taking a view on the role of the state and the degree of state intervention. To give an example of this so that you can relate, a few years ago in Rajasthan, working with the state government, we managed to reduce the number of statutes in Rajasthan from 950 to 150. One statute we could not change because it involved an ideological position on the role of the state was the Boating Regulation Act. And the question is, should the state, as in the government, regulate boats? I don't know how many of you knew that there is still something called the Aircraft Act of 1934, which enables the government not only to regulate aircraft, but there is a definition of aircraft, and that definition of aircraft also includes kites, not the birds, the other kind of kites. We are also talking about drafting and bad drafting. As lawyers, all of you are aware of IPC. If I ask you when was IPC passed, you will either say 1860 or 1861, whichever. If I ask you who was the architect of IPC, you may or may not mention Thomas Babington Macaulay. Thomas Babington Macaulay was not a lawyer. And if you look at his original draft of IPC in 1835, you will find it was very precise. Today, if I look at IPC, the IPC that exists now is not the one that was drafted by Macaulay. There were sections that were added later. Whenever sections were added later, because the language of drafting was not precise, you needed examples. I need this example to illustrate what that word means. In the parts that Macaulay drafted, the language is so precise you did not need examples to illustrate. So broadly speaking, there's an expression that used to be used a few years ago. It's no longer used that much now. Zero-based budgeting. So far as all the statutes are concerned, we need to ask, do we need this statute? What is the cause-benefit exercise involved in a statute? What happens if I don't have this statute? If you're familiar with the way legislation works, there is a statement of objects and reasons that comes with a bill which is meant to do precisely this. But if you look at the quality of the statement of objects and reasons, you will find that down the years it has deteriorated. So far as the procedural law and the speed of justice delivery is concerned, there are reports and reports and reports and reports. The earliest one, which is worth reading, and I think you should read it. Well, if it's police reforms you're interested in, you should read the report of the Police Reform Commission of 1902. But so far as the rest of it is concerned, I think all of you as students should read the report of the Rankin Committee in 1924-25. And you would not have to change a single word even today. as lawyers or budding lawyers or perhaps budding judges, your immediate reaction will be what in the Bible Moses' father-in-law Jethro told him in Exodus. You can't handle with the disputes, have more judges. And the standard response is, throughout the judiciary and throughout the bar, across reports, that we must have more judges and we must have more benches. More judges and more benches, they require resources. These are public resources, and unfortunately it is the case that because of what has happened with the legal system, I do not think there is any public support for greater resources for judicial reform. Whenever the money is given, it comes with strings. There were metrics that were supposed to be improved. The 11th Finance Commission gave money for fast-track courts, contingent on improvements. Did those improvements happen? No, they did not. The 13th Finance Commission gave money, grants in aid to the court system with conditions saying these are metrics that need to be improved. Did that happen? No, it did not. I think we also need to think in terms of reforming the Constitution, not in very broad terms. Of course, the broad terms is also important. The Constitution is supposed to be dynamic, and it's supposed to reflect the will of the people. Yet, after the 1973 judgment, the basic structure of the Constitution cannot be changed. Who decides, and by the way, that was a ratio of 7:6. And who decides what is the basic structure of the Constitution? The Supreme Court decides. This reminds me of a study that was conducted by the National Law University, Delhi. I'm sorry, Rajkumar, it was not done by O.P. Jindal, it was done by the National Law University, Delhi. What was this study? This study was a study that had 3 hypothetical cases, and it was administered to 60 former Supreme Court judges who, as Supreme Court judges, had actually administered the death penalty. So these 3 hypothetical cases were given to them, saying that, will you please tell us whether this is the rarest of the rare case justifying the death penalty? And they couldn't agree. Those judges could not agree. The simple point being that so far as the basic structure is concerned, it's fairly certain that the judges will not agree, just as in the Keshavananda Bharati case, they did not agree. But more pertinently, this is an important question, more pertinently from the point of view of the legal system, what is the role of the Supreme Court? We may think it is a hallowed institution, but the fact of the matter is that from the constitutional point of view, the Supreme Court has almost zero power over the high courts. So far as the Constitution is concerned, the University of Chicago Law School recently did a study of the average lifespan of written constitutions. And the average lifespan of a written constitution, according to this study, was 17 years. Just a vindication of the fact that perhaps the Constitution needs to be changed, because after all, it was based on the Government of India Act of 1935. There are some quick questions that you need to ask, because I did say you should ask questions about the legal system. Why don't the courts accept metrics for improvements? Everyone has some notions of productivity. That does not mean that the notions or norms of productivity have to come from outside, but internally, why should there not be norms for productivity? Why should there be vacations? The Supreme Court, I'm talking about the Supreme Court. There are plenty of institutions in India where individuals have vacations, but the individuals have vacations, the entire institution does not close down. We will hear about vacancies. By the way, the number of vacancies in courts, Supreme Court is different, is not inordinately high. If you make comparisons with government teachers, policemen, whatever, it's roughly about 30%. It's not inordinately high for courts, particularly lower courts. Whenever I have to get up on time, human habit, I have an alarm. I have an alarm, let's say, at 6 o'clock, but I will have a second alarm at 6:15. I almost never need the second alarm, but I will still have that second alarm. I think that's a useful metaphor for appeals. Do I really need a second appeal? If I'm going to have a second appeal, I'm no student of the law, but the second appeal is supposed to be on grounds of fact or grounds of law, not on grounds of fact. Yet I constantly come across judgments where the second appeal has been on grounds of facts. Even if I have a second appeal, do we need so many appeals? What about the language of the judgments? My favorite judge is a judge from Himachal Pradesh High Court. I don't know whether it's still there or has been transferred. The Supreme Court could not understand his judgments and had to send them back. Why can't we have more people like Lord Denning authoring judgments in India? Why can't, I said this earlier about statutes, why can't we have a judicial impact assessment about what is the impact of a judicial decision? Most universities have registrars. Why? Because academics are not necessarily very good at administration. What are academics good at? Academics are good at teaching and doing research. So let them do the teaching and the research. Exactly similarly, what are judges supposed to be good at? They're supposed to be good at delivering judgments. So why cannot the administration of the court system be handed over to court managers? And I would recommend for you a study, a very good study that was done by Vidhi on this. I mentioned the civil side, the criminal side. I told you I will persuade you to ask questions. On the civil side, with a great deal of fanfare, we had amendments to the Civil Procedure Code in 2001, 2002. Was it 2000, 2001? 2001, 2002, I think. At that time, it was expected that the average civil case would be settled in 1.5 years. Has it happened? It hasn't happened. Why hasn't it happened? What do we do about the Negotiable Instruments Act, cases under the Negotiable Instruments Act and the Motor Vehicles Act. On the criminal side, procedural law, nothing much has happened since the Malimath Committee. What about changing CRPC? What about changing the Indian Evidence Act? Finally, I've already taxed your patience enough. Finally, 2 anecdotes and then I will stop. Before the anecdotes, whatever our views on films, including Bollywood films, they reflect society. And so far as the legal system is concerned, other than Jolly LLB, the image that sticks in everyone's mind is Damini, Tariq pe Tariq. 2 anecdotes and then I will end. The first anecdote, well, one of the reasons I am here is many years ago I headed a project on legal reforms. At that time I went around asking all my lawyer friends, what is the oldest case in India? That was many years ago, so I did not ask Professor Rajkumar. He's not that old. It so transpired that none of my lawyer friends knew the answer to that question. So I changed my question and I asked, what is the longest dispute in terms of disputes that have been settled? Again, no answer. And then I found in the Guinness Book of World Records an entry saying that India has the dubious distinction of the longest dispute. The dispute was started in the year 1205 and ended in 1966, so it lasted for 761 years. And it was a dispute in a village near Pune when there was a family shrine and the family had divided, and the entire dispute was about who had the rights, the ancestral rights to worship in that shrine. I found 761 years incredible. So I began to write about it. Until I got a letter from a gentleman, those were the days of letters, I got a letter from a gentleman in Hyderabad who said, "Dear Mr. Debroy, you've been writing about this case. Have you actually looked up the case records?" I said, "No, I haven't." Some weeks pass, and then in the mail, snail mail, I get this photocopied bunch of court proceedings and testimony and evidence, 3 files from a lower court in Pune. So it was in Marathi. And what transpires from these court proceedings is that this case was started in January 1964 and concluded in December 1966, a little less than 3 years. In the course of his obiter dicta, the judge said that the roots of this can be traced back to 1205. So this is not quite the same thing as saying that the case lasted for 761 years. So I wrote him a letter saying, this gentleman a letter saying, "Thank you very much, I stand corrected, but will you please tell me what motivated you to go all the way to Pune from Hyderabad and dig up the records?" He wrote to me saying that because I now hold the record for the longest dispute in India. He was superseded, he used to work for the government, he was superseded in 1945. Got back, won his case, got back all of the benefits with retrospective effect in 1990, so the case lasted for 45 years. I wrote to him saying that I'm very delighted to hear this, that you won your case. I hope you are now in the Guinness Book of World Records. He said, Unfortunately, Guinness has said they will not have any more entries on long-standing disputes, particularly if they concern India. However, you will be happy to know I am in the Limca Book of Records. The second anecdote, and then I promise I will end. When I was involved in this law reform project, I met an interesting gentleman named Lal Bihari. Lal Bihari was actually dead. But he had been declared, Lal Bihari was actually alive, but he had been declared dead by his maternal uncle, who coveted the piece of ancestral land and bribed the Tehsildar to declare him dead. Lal Bihari fought a forlorn battle trying to establish that he was alive. He went and threw stones at the police station so that the cops would arrest him. He stood in the elections against the then Prime Minister. No avail. He remained dead. Lal Bihari then did some research and found that there were 24,999 other such living dead wandering around in UP, and he thought he should synergize all these attempts. So he formed Dead Man's Association of Mritak Sangh, and he was the founder president. And he changed his name to Lal Bihari Mritak. I found this fascinating, so I began to write about it. It was picked up by various people, and therefore there is a genuine prize out of Harvard, which is known as the Ig Nobel Prize. Lal Bihari was awarded the Ig Nobel Prize for peace for his strange pursuits. He couldn't go and receive the prize because he didn't have a passport, whatever. Eventually he was declared alive. I do not know what's happened to the other 24,999. Lal Bihari's life has been made into a film called Kagas, so you can watch it. A system changes when there is pressure for reform. Whichever aspect you look at, Consumer Protection Act of 86, Environment Protection Act of 86 did not happen because the government wanted the change. It happened because civil society wanted the change. RTI, whatever. So you are not only budding lawyers and budding judges and budding whatever, you are also citizens. The legal system will change in an indirect democracy like ours when we as citizens demand that change. And that is why I said, ask why. Pariprashnena pranipatena sevaya. Thank you very much.
It's a great occasion today for two reasons. Of course, the initiation of the Khaitan Endowment that essentially allows us to do 5 priority areas on which we are going to have focus. And today we had the opportunity to convene the lecture series, and of course there could not be a better person than Professor Bibek Debroy, who kindly agreed to deliver the lecture. It's indeed a fascinating and a captivating lecture that comprehensively covered many areas and also gave us many priority areas to focus our readings and our work and our research in terms of, the legal system and legal reforms. I would also like to seize this opportunity to thank Professor Debroy not only for visiting us and delivering the lecture today, but his continuous support to the university over the years, wherein he also engaged with our own students and with visiting students from law schools around the world at his office as part of our many collaborative activities and partnerships. And of course, we are immensely grateful to Khaitan and Company, and in particular to Mr. Haigrev Khaitan and Mr. Prasenjit, who is representing Khaitan and Company today for the endowment. And if I should just conceptualize or capture this afternoon's activities, I can just say that it's a confluence of philanthropy of ideas and philanthropy of resources, and we need this combination to ensure institutions to progress further. So on this particular note, I thank both Prasenjit and Professor Debroy for their time and for the opportunities. And I'm also indeed grateful to all the colleagues at the law school, led by Professor Srijit, Akriti, and Professor Nimika Jha and Professor Ashwin Mishra for guiding us this particular afternoon and even for curating this entire activity. And we are thankful to all the students, not only for your participation, but even for the interesting set of questions which are quite eclectic in nature. The program has ended, and I thank all the speakers and the deans and the faculty members, and of course the Vice Chancellor for participating in this lecture this afternoon. Before we depart, I would request all the students to kindly be seated for a few moments so that the guests can leave the hall. Thank you so much.